7580.
Yeah.
How are you today?
Yeah,
You're plugged up over here?
it's random, but I get people that call me because of stuff that has nothing to do with the city, but I think they just don't know where.
Yeah, and that's not uncommon. And the other thing is, there are a lot of resources outside of, what I do. Like the mediation. There's a lot of people that approach saying, issues that they can do themselves, adjusting capture. I mean, there are a lot of, there are myriad, scenarios that.
Correct.
Yeah, yeah. And about half the time it's like, there really is no resolution. And depending on how good a listener you are, how much better they are.
Well, yeah, I mean, I
that goes.
she feels so helpless in some of these cases.
Good morning, everyone. Glad to have you here for our October 25th agenda. And now I ask Beverly to give the roll call, please.
Thank you, Mr.
I call
Chairman.
to order.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Chairman McCackis.
Here.
Dr. Thomas.
Here.
Mr. Booker.
Here,
Mr. Dawson.
Mr. Dawson called, said he's on his way.
Thank you. Mr. Dorrance.
Here.
Mr. French. Mr. French, did everybody see him?
Yeah, we just wait.
Okay. Mr. Holmes. Mr. Madoff.
Here.
Ms. Stone. Present. Thank you.
Okay, we need a motion on the floor for the approval of the minutes for September the 20th, and if there are some additions or corrections.
I have a correction.
Go ahead.
My name is listed as present, and I was not.
Okay.
I don't know how important that is, but if you guys did something that I don't approve of, I want to make sure my name is off of that document.
Extremely.
Okay. All right.
Other than that, I'll make a motion for approval.
Second.
We have a motion on the floor and a second of approval of the minutes for September the 20th. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion approved. Now we have action items.
No action items, sir.
No action items. All right, presentations. Article 4, and you have received this electric vehicle fleet conversions over there, and it has a breakdown. But what we're going to do, the person that handles all of the different monies that we get through grants and all will make the presentation.
Is this the Proterra?
Yes.
Is it?
That's a combination of all the stuff.
Well, I'm just very excited about this.
All right, good morning, everyone. At last month's board meeting, there was a brief discussion on, now that we have funding for vehicles, do we want to start looking at electric vehicles? Should we start considering that? So over the last month, staff have done some background research, and we even had the opportunity to tour a manufacturing facility of electric vehicles. And so we've prepared this presentation to offer some of our key findings. So here's just a brief outline. First, I'll go over the state of the industry, where it's been, where it's going, some pros and cons of electric conversion, some of the cost factors. That's probably what you all are most interested in. A timeline of if we were to go electric, how soon could we get these vehicles on the streets? Some of the different funding opportunities for electric vehicles. And then I'll show you some photos from our site visit in Greenville, South Carolina, and then just some overall takeaways. So first, before I actually get started on this slide, I did want to emphasize how important the source of EV information is. Electric vehicle interest groups and the actual manufacturers of these vehicles have pumped a lot of money into researching the benefits of their vehicles. Because they are self-interested, there's a bit of a bias there. So as I was doing all of this research, I tried to find only data that was sourced by the federal government and academic institutions that had independent research going on. So as you can see, whenever I source a slide, I got that in the bottom left corner. This comes from U.S. Department of Transportation. This is just a state of the electric vehicle industry. This first line, it's a little hard to see those the dates, but this first line represents the percentage of transit vehicles that use electricity as their source of energy. In 2005, it was merely 1.1%. Fast forward to 2014, and it's just below 18%. If I had to guess, in 2016 right now, we're probably around 20% as an industry. The next line is actually the number of vehicles on the streets. Now, do keep in mind, again, the devil's in the details. This is battery electric vehicles and hybrid electric vehicles. So these numbers might seem a little bit high. That's because there are a lot of hybrids on the roads. But it's kind of the same thing. Back in 2007, there weren't a whole lot, but the industry has evolved quite a bit. On that third line, it's the cost of electric vehicles.
Grant, hold it just a minute.
Sure.
Cut the lights out, or maybe we can see it even better. Yeah, it's in front of you in this thing. That's all right. Go ahead. Go ahead, Grant.
Okay, so the cost factor of the vehicles themselves, the cost has come down significantly. In 2015, it was about $800,000 per vehicle. It's actually dropped even since then. It's closer to about $700,000.
Can I ask a question, or would you rather wait till the end?
I think questions are fine.
All right. What attracted me, and I'm only one board member, was that you could lease these batteries. I mean, the shell of the bus you can get for a very reasonable price, but you could lease these batteries, and wouldn't it be that this would be a perfect opportunity for grant money on these batteries?
Yes, ma'am. I think one thing that we would have to clarify with FTA is whether or not they allow leasing of batteries with their federal dollars.
Okay.
The purchase of
and
vehicles.
that would be key, because since this is it's not a new concept, but it's, in the grand scheme of things, a fairly new concept. I think the way to go would be to lease these batteries and not buy them, because they're quite expensive from what I learned, and if you lease them and there's a problem, the manufacturer takes care of it, whereas buying them would be expensive, and then it would require us to have more over on Gwinnett Street to manage and take care of these batteries. So I would really want to know if a lease on these batteries would be grant eligible.
I would guess that they are, only because leasing vehicles is an approved expense under FTA.
Well, we're talking about grants, not operating expenses.
Yeah.
Mike
Okay.
talked to CERTA regarding the specific grant we're talking about. Can you elaborate a little bit on?
Curtis and I met with legal counsel at CERTA to discuss this particular issue in the context of the entire view of moving into electric buses. The base question was, since we had received a grant for traditional buses, was there a problem in changing that grant to utilization of or purchase of electric buses? And there is not. It simply would require a certain amount of paperwork to adjust the grant documents. So that is not an issue. The question that we have that is still on the table that we've not gotten a response to is exactly what you're asking. Can you capitalize, under the terms of the grant, can you capitalize a lease for those batteries? And so we're waiting to get a response from the CERTA attorneys and the bond attorneys, which is even more important than CERTA attorneys, on if that is eligible to be counted as part of that entire grant.
Okay, because I noticed in Jack Kingston's report that they're looking at monies for federal dollars for electric buses. So, we're right on the cusp with this thing, and I would hope that we could engage you and engage Squire Patton and Boggs to do the same thing, because if the government is looking for us to become more efficient, and certainly in our historic district, fewer fuel emissions and quieter buses, that would be, it would seem to me, a very good avenue to accomplish all of the above. So I didn't mean to get off on a tangent, but I
And I think Grant, part of your
noticed.
presentation has some opportunities for federal.
Yeah, I'll go over the funding opportunities that are specific for.
But I noticed that in Jack Kingston's report, this is also mentioned about the electric buses.
Priscilla?
Thank you. I think, Ellen, your point is well taken in that regard, because what we are looking at is more efficiency, and longevity of these buses. So that will give us a little bit more leverage.
Sure.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, go ahead, Grant.
Okay, so we talked about the cost, which has gone down significantly. This fourth line is actually the cost of the batteries, which has also gone down. And then this last line is the capacity of the batteries. So all of these moving parts are favoring the electric vehicle manufacturing industry. And so the next, well, I'll get into it, but then we got to weigh the pros and the cons of going electric. This is just a map of the different transit agencies that are currently testing EVs in their fleet. And this was actually as of April of this year. Since then, the federal government has announced awards for their low emissions, no emissions program. So this map is actually needs to be updated because there are at least 20 new transit agencies that are going to be testing electric vehicles. If CAT were to procure, well, actually, just going back real quick, you can tell from this map that actually there are transit agencies in all geographies and all sizes that are testing EVs. You have the big boys. We have LA, Seattle, Portland. We have Boston and Chicago. But then we have Tallahassee, Chattanooga, Birmingham, Clemson, and that's just in the southeast. You'll also notice a bunch of universities are testing EVs. I added 3 logos here at the top. These are the 3 large manufacturers of electric vehicles. BYD, which is based in China actually, but they have a facility in California. Proterra, which they just moved their administrative offices from Greenville, South Carolina to the West Coast, but they still have a facility over here on the East Coast. And then there's New Flyer, which is based in Canada. So if we were to actually procure electric vehicles, these are the 3 big companies that would be bidding on them. So here's just a very basic comparison of the pros and cons of converting our fleet to electric. Obviously, fuel costs are much lower because it doesn't use fuel, it uses electricity. One of the big cost savings is anticipated to be maintenance costs, and I'll go over these in a little bit more detail in a little bit. Emissions, obviously, these vehicles are low or no emissions. And then public perception, which is important. These buses look really good. It gives CAT a much better image if we were to go that route.
Grant?
Sure.
When we have upfront cost, that's separate. You're gonna go over that?
Yes, sir. I'm gonna break down the costs in just a few slides.
Okay, good.
And that's actually probably the biggest downside of going electric is that they cost more. The capital cost is more than your average diesel vehicle.
Yeah. In addition to that, though, when you talk about the upfront cost, you mean that? Let me see what that guy from the electric company told us.
The BYD.
The upfront cost, the amount that you have to have, like for fuel and the equipment for that, is which is a big cost.
Yeah, and that's another factor that I'm going to go over. It's the charging configuration that you have for these vehicles, and if there are any infrastructure upgrades to your grid, like depending on where we're gonna, if we were to go this route, depending on where we would station our chargers, we got to make sure that there's the right electric capacity in those areas to accommodate those chargers.
Ellen?
It was my understanding, though, that the actual bus itself is not any more expensive than the buses we're operating. It is simply the battery. I mean, when I looked at the Proterra buses, it wasn't so much the structure of the bus that was more, it was the battery itself. Am I correct?
I think you are right. At the same time, I think there are a lot of variables based on what type of battery you have and what type of charging configuration.
Right.
They can customize
Right.
a lot
I
of
mean,
different things, but
and I'll just say to my colleagues here, what was, I thought, a really good starting point, like I mentioned earlier, would be the downtown area, where you're not as many miles. It's a more compact district, and it would give us the opportunity to see the livelihood of these batteries, how often they have to be recharged. And I completely understand that there's going to be a different setup for them as far as maintenance and in the workshop what would be required, the grid, so forth and so on. But I'm truly want us to look at this in a very strong manner, because I think that it could be a wonderful, wonderful thing for the downtown area.
And that's,
at least starting out.
And that's what you're talking about is good, but then we have to look at the routes and all,
Yes.
because they'll be much shorter, and then we'd have to change the way that the buses are set up in that case. Okay, go ahead. Oh, excuse me, Bill?
Yeah, kind of along the line of what Helen's talking about, if we compare bus to bus, diesel to electric or hybrid, taking out the fuel, whether it's the battery or diesel, if we're talking about the vehicle itself, is there any difference in the lifespan of those vehicles?
I have a slide that answers that in just a few.
Okay, can you give me the short answer?
The short answer is probably. It all comes down to maintenance costs.
Okay.
And that's a big, big factor in the lifetime cost of that vehicle. And because even the first generation electric vehicles that are on the streets right now in various parts of the country, those vehicles have not yet hit their useful life. So nobody knows, not even the EV manufacturers know if there's going to be a significant cost savings on the maintenance side. All the research shows that there will be, but until those vehicles hit their 12-year useful life, we do not know for sure.
But we're getting close to that.
But we're getting close.
So,
Yeah.
assuming that winds up being true,
Mhm.
that we actually get a longer life out of the vehicles, the real difference in the upfront costs, long term, is just creating the infrastructure to support it. The
That is
charging stations
very
and that sort of
significant
thing.
savings.
Yeah, that's a big upfront cost, but what's involved ongoing? Is that something where every 5 years you have to come back in and refit? Is that mostly just a PM situation? Are there ongoing costs with that infrastructure once you create it, or is it essentially once it's in place, there's no huge additional expense for 50 years?
Steve, did you want to elaborate on the maintenance side?
Well, maintenance and
The only
replacement
big-
or updating.
The only big update on the maintenance side is gonna be batteries.
And that's what
And
I
I
want,
believe
Lisa.
the battery is gonna come so far along in the next 2 to 5 years. The people we've talked to, they're gonna give us the batteries at a significantly less cost. But far as the bus itself, the electric motor, the transmission, the rear, and all that will stay the same. It's just gonna be a battery cost.
All right, so I guess what I'm trying to get at here, and I'm struggling with it in my own head, but when we're talking about these upfront costs, the big thing we're talking about here is the physical infrastructure for charging these systems. I'm not talking about the batteries or the buses themselves, but the infrastructure we have to put in place for keeping them running. And it just pull a number out of a hat. We spend $1 million to do that. Do we 5 years from now have to spend another $500,000, or once we've invested that $1 million, that's pretty much done, other
That's
than
pretty much done.
forever?
Yes.
Unless there's a whole, culture shift okay.
And I'll get a little bit further into the details on charging configurations, because the configuration that we would choose if we were to go electric, there's a significant variance between the overhead fast chargers and the in-depot overnight chargers. And we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars difference. So it really depends on what would be right for us, and would we place some overhead chargers, on the outskirts of the city, and then have some plug-ins at our facility over on Gwinnett. Those are the things that we'd have to look at in more detail.
Right, and just to highlight on that, so the buses that they make that can go a lot of miles have a different configuration of batteries, and those typically charge back at the bus yard overnight. Takes approximately 5 hours to charge those types of buses, and those buses are more expensive. The less expensive.
You mean the battery or the bus?
The bus is in itself. As they sell the bus, it's a lot more money. The batteries are more money, yes, for the long-term charge.
The reason I ask that is I still go back to the possibility of the leasing of some of these batteries.
It'll be more to lease those type of batteries.
Gotcha.
Okay, and so the less expensive batteries to lease and buses to buy, when you buy it all together, is the buses that have battery chargers that do not go as far. So they require, but on the flip side, they require the expensive fast charging technology installation. So it's if you save money in batteries in the bus, you're going to spend in the charging. If you spend more money in the batteries in the bus, you're going to save in the charging, because the chargers at the yard would only be about $50,000 as opposed to $350,000 for the fast charger.
Is that a wash, though? The cheap bus, expensive charger, the expensive bus, cheap charger, what's the balance? I mean, how close do they come to essentially?
I mean, it could be a wash. The issue isn't, and I know money's important, but what's more important is to get the right bus for what we want to do. So if we want a downtown type bus, then the long-term battery and the charging at the yard may not be the right bus. If we want a bus on the 14 Abercorn, I mean, we would want a longer term because it can go more miles. So it depends on what we want, and then they have different options we can choose from. So as far as cost goes, yeah, I mean, at some point you're going to have similar cost. It really depends on, because we asked the question, well, which type of bus is going to stick around for a while, and which one's going to fade away? And I think the answer they gave us is probably pretty accurate, is that they'll both stay around because people have different needs, and therefore some require fast chargers and some don't want the fast chargers. They want the long. If you only have a suburban type express route where you're running this electric bus, you don't want fast chargers.
Well, I'm assuming going into this that you'd be creating a mix of these things, based on your different routing needs.
Some facilities have a mix, some have one or the other. Some are converting to the longer life battery that they informed us, like they had an order in and they changed it before it actually started manufacturing because they changed their mind. Because buses, as technology improves, different types of batteries are being invented. So as this gets to the market, people who had an order in that they haven't yet done yet may want to switch.
Well, and that brings up a question that maybe you can't answer right now, but as we move into this, we're going to be moving into it gradually. We're not going to go out and replace the fleet. So,
and that's a good point. So the map that Grant pulled up, and if you could go back to that real quick. So you see there's a lot of facilities, and Grant used the word correctly, testing these buses. So the actual numbers aren't on there, but a lot of those facilities only have 2, 3, 4 buses. Some of them had 6. I mean, and their fleet is bigger than ours, but they're testing them because the research isn't in yet on the longevity and the total cost and all this other stuff. It would be a mistake to change your entire fleet with this unknown. SEPTA in Pennsylvania, for example, they purchased 25 electric vehicles. You think that's a lot, but they also purchased 700 diesels. So that was just for them, it's a small test. And so it wouldn't be necessarily wise to do a mass conversion with so many unknowns. But again, testing seems to be what everybody's doing, and the low-no grants that are being awarded are for testing these vehicles. I mean, they're giving low-no grant awards to people who are only buying a couple buses.
Well, I guess my thought on that is if we're going to identify a need in the broad dual configurations of short and long range, is we identify a need for each of those, if it's possible, to also identify which of those technologies is the most volatile, which is the most likely to change in the near future.
Right.
Then we go to the other one for our investment.
And cost, we keep talking about cost because it is large. Cost, as Grant showed you, has continually gone down. And the more the industry invests in battery technology, the more it's going to go down. I mean, just like when flat screen TVs came out, they were $5,000–6,000. Now you can get them for under $1,000. So that's the same way the battery line is going. Is the cost is going down and down because now there's competition, and they're putting more resources into building a better vehicle and getting business. So let them drive the cost down, and while people test it, I mean, then if you want to do a fleet conversion, why not wait till the cost continues to go down and the maintenance is proven?
And I should have put the cost slide in a little bit closer to the front. I know that's gonna raise a whole bunch of questions, but I'll get there very soon, I promise. So we talked about the cost a little bit. We did mention the risk of the unknown. Again, those original EV vehicles have yet to hit their useful life. So we're not sure that for certain that the maintenance costs are going to be lower, although research suggests that it will be. And then these are also some somewhat unknowns. We're not sure to what extent, but we're pretty sure that going electric will require increased qualifications, especially on the maintenance end, as well as training costs.
Now, Grant, if we purchase X number of the buses, and what you're talking about is as well as what Curtis talked about. Excuse me. On those buses, is that some have already got a number of in testing now, and what you're talking about, some 12,000 miles. What is it?
12 years.
12 years, I mean. Yeah, the 12 years, a period of time that they're going to be utilized. Now, what's the earliest that some of these buses have been bought that's in the testing stage now?
Foothill Transit was the first agency to purchase them. I want to say, I'm not sure, I want to say it was 6 years ago.
6
maybe?
years, yeah.
So they're only halfway through their expected useful life.
Yeah.
Right. And so, as an example, again, there's unknowns. One of the unknowns that we found out was braking. So, 6 years of using the bus, and they haven't changed their brake pads. But that brought another problem up. Correct, Steve? Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
On the braking system, you go 6 years and you got 150,000 miles on the brakes, and then you got fatigue and wear on the springs and all. So the brakes actually will have to be replaced just because of the spring kit deterioration and all. The brake shoes look brand new, but they didn't configure that the springs and all that, and the S-cams and the bushings would go bad. So now they're re-looking at the springs and the bushings to upgrade them to match what the buses are doing, because most of the stopping power comes within the electric motor itself. When you decelerate, the electric motor itself stops. So what they're looking at and what we've seen on the brakes, these brakes could go 10 years before they need to be replaced, but they have to reconfigure and re-engineer the springs and the bushings and all to match this.
Right.
So they're doing a lot.
Pros and cons.
Right. And so they're learning as well as
Right.
time goes on.
Right, but I think that's incredible that they can go for 10 years and not have to be replaced.
This is a slightly different question, and you may not be able to answer it, but interestingly, the topography here is such that everything's flat. So does it lend itself to this kind of technology more than, say, we're one in a hilly environment and that sort of thing?
Yes, I believe so. Steve? Thoughts?
We'll get a lot more usability out the brakes and all, because the hilly, but actually what they looked at was hilly parts of the country on them brakes, and they're not sure the brakes ever reach life. That's why they having to re-engineer the other things to go with it. And here we'll use a whole lot less braking. You may never need to change the brakes the entire life of the vehicle, besides having to do it for the springs and the bushings, because you have to check that on your RPM. But right now, everything looks good.
Okay.
And we're gonna use a lot less
Very
here.
interesting.
And when we were up in Greenville, they did tell us that the climate is a factor as well. It's not a huge factor, but warmer climates typically lend themselves to better usage of those vehicles. They've had a few more problems up in the colder climates.
But, just another question. When I looked at them, they said that it was easier to air conditioning was less drain on the battery than heat.
Mhm.
Is that,
That's what they said.
so that would lend itself better here?
Yep. So one of those first pros that I mentioned was fuel savings. This is a chart again from the U.S. Department of Transportation. This is the fuel economy per diesel gallon equivalent. And one thing that's actually not even on here is diesel miles per gallon. I think I don't know, Steve, is our average right under 4? Is that correct?
We're doing on the hybrid side about 4.1, and on the conventional diesel side about 3.9.
Okay, so it's even less than right here. The U.S. Department of Transportation estimates that CNG vehicles get about 4.51 miles per gallon. This is fuel cell vehicles, which hasn't really gone mainstream, but it does get you 7.3 on average. And then right down here, here's the battery electric vehicles. This is 17.48 miles per gallon, which is pretty significant.
Grant, and that down here with humidity factor, I think ours would be a little bit lower than that. I was looking at it, talking to a couple other people, and talking to the guys at Clemson on the phone. They're getting about 15.43, and I think that's where we'll be here.
Right, and also the factor of when you charge and use electricity to charge the batteries, that is not necessarily factored in the miles per gallon equivalent. So when you factor that in, it does bring it down a little bit.
Yep. Obviously, maintenance costs, we touched on that earlier. And again, Steve could probably expand on this a little bit more, but on the maintenance side, it's pretty simple why experts are projecting a significant reduction in the maintenance costs. You see all the different components that are required for diesel vehicles, and then you look at electric, and it's really, they simplify things on the electric side. So that's really their pitch as to why maintenance costs are going to be so much less. It is just fewer components equals fewer costs.
These are for diesels, Grant, and you don't have it for the ordinary fuel, the regular fuel that's being used.
I'm sorry?
It's the same.
The diesel's on the left-hand side of the slide. These are the different components that are in a diesel vehicle.
Yeah,
oh,
but
gasoline.
Yeah.
Oh,
we don't
I'm
use
sorry.
gasoline buses.
Yeah, we don't have any gasoline heavy-duty vehicles.
No heavy duty. Okay, go ahead.
Emissions, you all already know this, but I just threw it in there anyway. You can just see the raw figures on what US DOT is estimating in terms of tailpipe emission savings on going electric. And then I just threw in a slide on public perception. Not only do these buses look really good, but one big difference as a passenger is that you'll notice that they're actually quiet too. So when a bus pulls up to the stop, you don't even hear it, which is pretty crazy. You know, the diesels make a pretty good amount of noise. On the interiors though, I'd say it's about the same. You still hear some noise on the inside. All right, so here's the slide that I should have put at the very beginning. Cost comparisons can vary, and I'm gonna touch on this again. the source of the information is so critically important here. There have been studies funded by the pro-EV interest groups that tend to deliver fewer lifetime costs on average than some of the non-biased research that I've looked at. And this is actually the best comparison that I found. It was prepared by Columbia University this past spring, and it was funded by MTA in New York City. So the actual transit agency partnered with Columbia to do a study of, what are the cost benefits of converting to electric. So just to briefly walk you through this chart, the capital purchase price cost is in blue, the fuel and electricity cost is in orange, and then the anticipated maintenance cost is in gray. So this study estimated that on average there was a savings of $170,000 per unit, and that's over 12 years. So it might not seem like a whole lot of savings, but when you look at an entire fleet, we have about 65 vehicles in our fleet right now. If you're going to say that each one going electric will save $170,000 over 12 years, that's $11 million, which is almost a savings of $1 million per year, and that is pretty significant. So I just wanted to briefly do that calculation for you. Now this does not include the charging cost, and that's on the next slide.
But it doesn't include either any grants that might be available to offset these costs, correct?
Correct. This just is the lifetime cost of electric versus diesel. It does not factor in the funding opportunities.
So it looks like the break-even point there is about 900,000 miles before you start dealing with the maintenance costs.
This is not miles. These are all just costs. So
what's the total cost? I'm sorry.
The total cost of the blue, you can see they estimated that with all the add-ons with the electric vehicles, you're looking at just over $800,000 per unit.
So is there a mileage or a year figure where you start seeing the benefit from the EV?
My guess is that it's just it's one of those charts where the longer you have the electric vehicle, the more benefits you'll see on the cost side. I mean, you can look at a diesel, the lifetime of a diesel vehicle, what the costs are, and after they reach, I don't know, Steve, 7-8 years,
Right around 7 years.
the maintenance costs start to skyrocket. And again, we haven't. Those first generation electric vehicles are just about to hit that 7-year mark next year, and so we're going to really see if the same thing kind of happens, and on the electric side there are more costs. Experts are saying that that's not going to happen, but only time will tell, really. So the next slide, we have the cost factor of energy and infrastructure, and this kind of breaks down the two different charging configurations that are available. We have the en-route charger, so we would literally have this charger somewhere outside of our facilities, whether it be Oglethorpe Mall or Savannah Mall, somewhere else. And these are so-called fast chargers. Some EV manufacturers are estimating that it's about 10 to 13 minutes per charge, but you can see that the range is actually much smaller than the in-depot, slow chargers. At the same time, that unit cost for the overhead fast charge is much higher. That's because, and I'm going to show you a photo in a second. It's a pretty serious system that they have to do an overhead fast charge, compared to the plug-in style, which is just a small kiosk. You barely even know that it was there. There are some unknown installation costs for both. We're starting to iron those out a little bit, working with Proterra to kind of get an estimate on that. And then infrastructure upgrades. I know that's been a big question in the past. What does it mean for our grid? Are we going to have to work with Georgia Power? The short answer is yes, we are going to have to work with Georgia Power. But since I created this presentation, Georgia Power has visited our facility on Gwinnett, and they they said that they didn't see any issues. Any upgrades to the grid, they would cover. So we would not have to cover, but we would still have to pay for any installation costs of a charging station if we went that route. So again, going back to the risk of the unknown, I'll just briefly go through this. There's insufficient data on battery life and then the general durability of these vehicles. We're starting to hammer out the unknown infrastructure costs. We think that those will be very minimal. And then the unknown need for additional training and qualified employees. I don't think that's going to be a huge factor, but it is still an unknown. And then some of the other factors to consider. First, and this is probably the most important factor in my opinion, it's timing. On the good side, the industry is developing rapidly. The confidence in the technology is building, and the federal government is pumping money into this type of technology through their FAST Act. And we're not sure how long. It's only a few more years the FAST Act is going to be around. We don't know what direction the federal government's going to take on that. So there's a good side and a bad side to that. Also, I asked in Greenville, what is the downside of waiting a couple of years to see, I'm assuming the costs are going to go down, the technology is going to only get better. Is there a downside to waiting a few more years? And they didn't really give me a good answer on that. So,
Of course not, they're
yeah.
gonna sell you a
But
bus.
Right.
it sounds like one downside could be that this revenue stream to support this could go away.
Right. The funding availability is huge, and so that's
4 more years.
Yep.
4 more years of the
4 more
FAST
years.
Act.
Right.
And so after that, there may not be another FAST Act. So
Right.
4 more years of 4 more rounds of funding provided by the federal government for not only just bus and bus facility, but also for no or low emission vehicles.
Yeah. And I'll go into detail on some of those grant programs and the local match requirement and funding amounts and all of that in just a second. Logistics is also another factor to consider. Our business model is going to completely change if we were to go with electric because there will be limits on the hours and the miles on a vehicle. We've never really had that issue before, so it'll definitely have an impact on our schedules. So that's definitely something that we want to look at. Utility rates and infrastructure. If we're really serious about this, we're definitely going to have to go into further discussions with Georgia Power on peak rates and demand rates. Those change based on when you are charging your vehicles and how much energy you're using. So that's kind of the next step. And then obviously commitment. This kind of goes back to the funding. Funding for vehicles is limited. We have a significant amount right now. We're not sure when that next flood of funding is going to come through. But also I wanted to point out, you're not just investing in the technology. If you go to electric, you're investing in the manufacturer as well. And there are only 3 big manufacturers of these vehicles, and you have to be really confident of your decision if you go that route. So I talked about funding opportunities. Here are the major funding opportunities where electric vehicles qualify. These top 4 are federal programs. CMAQ, that's really intended for areas that are in non-attainment. We are in attainment. Our air is fresh, so we don't even qualify for this program. But these are the 2 big ones. The 5339 bus and bus facilities. It's a formula program. We get about $330,000 per fiscal year from this program, and electric vehicles do qualify under this program, although it's not a whole lot of money that we get every year. The 5339C LONO program, that is new to the FAST Act. Before, in MAP 21, there was just 5339 formula, and there was a I don't think they called it 5339C, but there was a LONO discretionary program where you had to be in non-attainment in order to qualify. They did away with that, and now they're opening it to everyone. So we, for for the first time, do qualify for a 5339C low-no application. On the flip side, the FTA also had a 5339B program, which they launched with FAST Act, and the B program is what we just won the $1.6 million for paratransit vehicles. So just another discretionary program. We won it. My guess is that they will never award an agency 2 in a row for the exact same program. So I don't think we should go after B next time, but C is definitely something that we should look at. If the federal government's going to help pay for it, then why not? The Tiger program, this has been around for a while. This is a huge capital program. As you can see, $500 million. When I was up in Greenville, we did apply for a Tiger grant. We got confirmation from FTA that you could actually apply for vehicles. Usually when you think of the Tiger projects, they've been giant TOD projects, building massive facilities, but you can, if you're clever with how you propose the project, you can actually get electric vehicles through it too. So just another one to consider. And then Mike did some research on the CERTA, and that does qualify as well. We're not sure about the availability of that funding though, and whether or not we're going to see another round of it. Just one last point. These two, the 5339 programs, the standard 80-20 split between federal and local match is actually different with these programs. They encourage electric vehicles, and it's actually, I might get this flipped, but it's 85% federal, 15% for the vehicle purchase, and any related equipment, such as the chargers, is a 90-10 split. So if you can get funding through the 5339 program for electric vehicles, there is a significant cost savings at the local level. Yeah. Okay, and then just a brief timeline. If the board were to choose, say that we were going to go electric, this is kind of how long it would take before we actually see the vehicles themselves. We'd have to do a cost estimate for infrastructure upgrades, develop the specs with Steve's group, and then define our charging configuration and logistics. Then we'd have to go through the RFP process, which will take a few months. Proterra's estimated 18-month delivery. I'm not sure what the other manufacturers are estimating, but in total, we're more or less looking at about a 2-year window between when we decide to go electric and we have the funding availability to when we actually start seeing them on our streets.
On this situation, Steve, so between the three that you have, the only three that are doing this with the electric vehicles, you get the information which one has been most successful. There's certain data that you can get to make sure of that. So in case the CAT board decides on one, and of course we're going to take Steve, he's done an excellent job in that area for what we have now, and that is going to be real important for us to gain as much information as you can on that grant, and then work with Steve and whoever else you need, and then bring that up to board so that it can be analyzed.
And that is a big decision. Is if you go electric, that's one big decision. The next big decision is which electric manufacturer do you choose? Because you're kind of in it for the long haul once you choose that.
Go ahead.
I mean, just kind of an in-your-face question. I mean, Proterra's in Greenville. I mean, obviously you put out an RFP, but it would seem to me that a company this close to us would probably have the best prices.
Yeah, and they talked about, if we had any issues, and this was all part of their sales pitch, if we had any issues with our vehicles, they could literally send someone with the part in a truck down here, and it would be here, in a few hours. That's obviously a benefit of having them so close, but at the same time, there's more to it than just that. You gotta look big picture.
But we would go through the regular bid process for that.
Yes, except one exception. I'll go back real quick to these funding opportunities. The 5339 Low-No program, FTA made a very interesting exception in this program where they encourage transit agencies to partner with a manufacturer before submitting the application. You didn't have to go through the RFP process to partner. It's very bizarre that they did that, but yeah, and they did the same thing with the mod sandbox too. They encourage partnerships in advance. I think they're trying to cut through a little bit of the red tape with that. But all but 3 of the, I want to say 21, 5339 Lono awardees partnered in advance of their application. So they selected before the award was even made that they were going with that company.
But couldn't we do the RFP prior to that, and then we have our company, so that we go through the channels that we feel like are in the best interest of the citizens and get the lowest bid, and then say, this is our company?
I think we could do that. There wouldn't be any issue.
As long as there's no commitment to pay when there's no funding source.
I understand that, I just want to make sure that we get the best price for the vehicles if that's the route that we choose.
Grant,
Yes, sir.
the timeline on this of 24 months, if we, back to the original plan for the 13 diesel buses, they're not 13, for the diesel buses, what was the timeline on that? Because we were going to have to order them, they were going to have to be built. How big a difference are we talking about in timelines? Is that substantially different?
Steve, did you want to?
We go on assembly line May 2018 is when our buses come down the assembly line at Gilly. We will be out there the first part of May on our first 18 35-footers.
May of next year. So
May
then we're looking at 6 or 7 months versus 2 years.
2018.
2018.
Or 2018. So we're really not looking at a huge difference. What we're not talking about 24 months here really. We're talking about 6 months of difference between getting the diesels and getting the electric.
Well, actually, it's probably the same. I think Gillig estimates about 18 months from when you.
About 18 months, and they put us in line fairly quickly.
So the only difference really is the paperwork.
Yeah, going through the RFP process would be some extra time that we would need.
Right, so.
RFQ, excuse me.
Yeah, so let's just like straighten that out a little bit. So if we go for the federal funding, then we can partner. But if we want to use some of our state funding, then we'd have to do an RFP. What's the difference?
Could we combine some of that state funding with the federal money if we did the RFP, or are those just separate?
Yeah, there's some restrictions. In fact, we just got an email from State Road Tollway Authority that we cannot lease the batteries. We'd have to use it out of our general operating fund. But one of the things with the CERTA money, which is the state money, is that they want the buses on the street for 3 years, as opposed to, what they originally intended, which was 5 years. Yeah, no, absolutely. So there's a time, there's time sensitive as well, is that we got to get buses ordered and get them made and on the street.
Well, and that the reason I asked the question was because of what Helen said. We need buses.
Right.
And that's right. If there's going to be a huge difference in going to EV versus diesel, that our need, as much as I want to go electric, that would be it. But it doesn't sound like there's a big difference, and either one would fit within that 3-year time frame.
Right.
And one other thing that I'm kind of sorting through right now, and I'm going to talk to Mike about this afterwards, but there is the possibility when you can never match federal funding with other federal funding. Everybody knows that. But you can match federal funding with state funding and private funding or any local funding. And so one thing that I want to figure out is just potentially, not saying that we're making this decision or anything, but could we use just a small portion of that state funding that we have left over in CERTA to then capitalize on that by then applying to a Lono grant and then use federal and state, and there would be no cost locally. That would be the ideal situation, but I know CERTA has some disclaimers where they have to maintain ownership of whatever capital item is purchased. So those are the questions that I still need to have answered.
Wayne, I just had one question. I know that we've run into problems with
being able to purchase things that are made in other countries, the Buy America program. How do we address that if there's only 3 in the market and one of them's in Canada?
The other's in California.
All 3 of those manufacturers are Buy America compliant. It all comes down to, it's not where the headquarters is, it's the materials that are used. And so long as they have that American steel, that's the big thing. And it's a certain percentage. I think they just increased to 75% American made. Then you're Buy America compliant. And I know at least Proterra has said that even with these new requirements, they are Buy America certified. We'll obviously need to verify with BYD and New Flyer that the same applies to them.
Do we get any sense that Gillig is working on this type of technology, because that's the majority of our fleet?
That's a very good question. Gillig, I haven't seen a whole lot out of Gillig.
They're looking into it, but they're not in any kind of production mode. They're not. That's not their business model right now. But they know that that's coming, so they are starting to work on that.
Okay.
Yeah, and Steve said this jokingly while we were in Greenville, but I think there might be some truth to it. Gillig might be sitting back intentionally, and then they are such a giant company, they could potentially purchase one of these other companies.
Yeah.
So that's just something to keep in the back of your mind that could potentially
Just
happen.
like the V8 technology on the hybrids, they just bought it out, and that's still a diesel engine, but it completely cuts off, unlike the Allison drive. But they bought that, and they may be sitting back just waiting to see who's got the best product out there.
Let somebody else work out the kinks.
That's
They
right.
follow them up.
Somebody else work it out.
All right, so I went through the timeline. Now, just very briefly, a recap of our facility tour in Greenville. And again, this was Proterra that we toured. And the difference between Proterra and the other 2 manufacturers are that Proterra is the only manufacturer that exclusively produces electric transit vehicles. BYD does, I think, electronics and compliances. They have a few other different industries that they touch. And then New Flyer, as we know, they do diesel vehicles, hybrid vehicles, all of that. But Proterra is the only one that is exclusively electric. So the manufacturing floor, as you can see here, it was very large. It was clean. It was pretty cool. We were able to see about 8 or 9 different vehicles in various stages of production. Here's just a photo of the composite. Just a shell of the vehicle just came in, and we were able to look at that. Then they start adding some securements and some siding. A couple vehicles were in this phase. Here's just kind of another look at this is all the interior, obviously, and this is the back of the vehicle. And I throw this in here, and I truly apologize. My phone ran out of battery as I was snapping photos, and so this is not my photo, but this is a photo from Proterra of one of their completed interiors. I just threw this in here because you don't really notice a difference when you walk in one of these electric vehicles. They look pretty much exactly the same as any standard diesel. They're fully customizable. You can add in all different types of signage, lights, fabrics, seat configuration, the whole works. One vehicle was actually 2 vehicles were actually up on lifts, so we did get to look underneath them, which was really cool because a lot of the components are underneath the vehicle. So here's just kind of a photo of that. You can see Steve down there looking closely. And then we didn't actually get to see a vehicle with the batteries installed underneath, but this is where the batteries are placed. Proterra, another reason why they're unique is that they place their batteries in between the axles, the wheel axles, between the front and the rear. And they do this for a number of reasons, and I'm sure Steve could probably elaborate a little bit. I think one of their main reasons is for safety. The middle of the vehicle is the strongest point. Very small chance that something's going to be able to break through and damage that area.
It is the best impact zone to have the batteries versus the front or the back.
And one thing that Proterra did point out and I'm glad that they did. They said that any new upgrades to the technology, regardless of what it is, they are committed to fitting those batteries in that exact same configuration with the same dimensions. So if you were to choose Proterra, and 7 years down the road, the best battery ever were to be manufactured by Proterra, you'd have the capability of just popping the old one out and popping the new one in. You didn't have to do any crazy stuff with the vehicles themselves. And then here's a look at the overhead charger. This is again the fast charging technology. Now you can make these things look completely different. And actually, they showed us some photos of how agencies have designed this pole to look like a light post, and they've kind of prettied it up a little bit. And then you can kind of hide this. Some have like little caps on them. But we were able to see this, and then you can barely even see the in-depot charger over here that we looked at. I mean, it's literally just a very small kiosk with a plug that you plug into the vehicle. And so the second half of our day, after we did the facility tour, we went down to Clemson, South Carolina, and they have a handful of Proterra EVs in their fleet. So we got a chance to look at them in action, and we actually got to ride around for a little bit. And then this was great. We actually got to pull up to one of their overhead chargers and watch it do a full charge. And we asked them to do it a few times so we could see it. But this is what it looks like. One thing that I should mention, this is actually very interesting. This particular overhead charger is at their Memorial Hospital. And they strategically chose the Memorial Hospital because it is on its own grid. And so if the power were to ever go out, this charger would still, unless the Memorial Hospital's grid went out too, this charger would still have energy. So that's very interesting, something to think about in the future.
And the availability of that charger, what all is Memorial Grant? Did you get about that, the time element that Memorial is using? Say that maybe we worked out a situation with Memorial to save us a considerable amount of money. What is the status on that?
Well, I'm not sure how it works. We'll have to ask the Clemson folks how they split the energy costs with Memorial in South Carolina. But I'm assuming that they pay a share of whatever the overall costs are. That's probably something that we would look into here as well. If we placed it on a hospital grid, then we'd have to approach them and negotiate some sort of cost sharing of that electricity that's being used.
Okay,
yeah. So with that, these are really just the big takeaways from our entire analysis. The biggest takeaway, I think, was that the lifetime cost of electric vehicles compared to diesel and hybrid, it's very likely to be less. However, there's obviously that risk of the unknown, which is very important. We know for a fact that the purchase price is going down and the battery technology is improving rapidly. So I guess questions that we still need to ask ourselves, one, how will EVs fit into CAT's business model in terms of logistics, charging configuration, all of that. And then really the biggest question though is, when is the right time to invest? I think all of us that went on the tour and who have been involved in this analysis agree that EVs are a wave of the future, but it really comes down to timing and funding availability, whether we think it's the sweet spot on the technology side and the price. We're not sure how much further down the prices are going to go and how quickly the technology is going to improve. These are all unknown. So this is really what we need to ask ourselves.
Now, Grant, about, we went to Atlanta, we got $10,800,000 to purchase those vehicles that we got. How far along is it now, or maybe you can answer that, is that we will be able to, I know it was mentioned, but how long will it take for us to get their overall approval.
I think we basically have their overall approval. What we have to do is at the appropriate time submit the invoices for payment. But what CERTA wants to do is for all of these monies, for all of the grant recipients to be pulled down within a 3-year period, which means that ultimately they want all of this to be completed by July of 19. So when you start looking at timelines and that 24-month timeline that we're looking on there, you could be bumping right up against that.
All right, any questions for Grant? Any more questions?
I would like to point out that whether or not we do this now or with a low-no or whatever, the point is we're looking at these alternative fuels. And not just with fixed route, I know we're also looking at, with the $1.6 million grant award we got, looking at purchasing a new paratransit vehicles, and then we're actually looking at propane-fueled vehicles. So, so there's other areas too that we can try to get low emissions.
So going to these conferences is advantageous.
Go ahead.
Relative to these two questions you asked at the end, how do they fit the business model and when's the time to invest? I'm assuming that these are questions for the board. So what's our action plan on this? Because we do have some deadline issues to consider. How do we make this decision? When do we make this decision?
Well, when we got more information, as much information as we can get, and working with the timeline, then it gives Curtis, to go ahead and work with Grant and whoever else is needed, so that we will be able to give the information to the board and go from there, Bill.
Bill, I think we need to put a date on that.
I do too. I think Bill is right that Curtis, we're going to lean maybe on Curtis when we come to the board, but I don't want these windows of opportunity to fly past us because we don't have our act together.
Yeah, I mean, I think
we need to make a decision by the next board meeting if we're doing this or not. You can't wait anymore because of the time it takes to do this.
Yeah, I think we've got to move, and
So,
part of that decision too, and we're going to need advice from you on this, is whether or not we do the RFP or do we just partner and go straight to the low-no funding, or do we do some mix of those two things?
Yeah.
Do we stay with some of the diesel? Do we? I mean, I think we need. I think we need a plan from you about, okay, how do we go forward? Should some of this be diesel? Should some of this be low-no? Should some of this be a match, trying to use some of the state money for the low-no? I would like to see a detailed proposal about how we go forward with this. And a proposal that we can look at the next meeting, and if not at the next meeting, then certainly by the one after that, vote, so that we, by the end of the year, we're telling you, move forward on something.
And the thing about it is, Curtis, that, as I said, want to get all the information that we can, so the possibility of having it at the next meeting, because the reason why I said all of that information, so that the board can make a quick decision.
In fact, if we've got that data before the meeting, it's going to be easier to make a decision at the meeting.
Right, and so we need to still close the gap with Georgia Power. We need to finalize the details with, I know we can't lease the batteries, but finalize the details of what we would need to do to change our scope with our original application that we got that money with CERTA. Break down the exact cost it's going to take to do this and what we have available, and then the timing of the low-no and how we're going to approach that.
Well, and I suspect that we're probably going to want to do a mix of buses. We're not going to just commit all of this to the EV. So how much do we stay with the traditional bus? How much do we go with EV? The other question then with the EV, which is also a detailed analysis you're going to need to give us, is how much of this do we do for the short range and how much do we for the long range?
James?
What Bill is saying just now, I'm in accord with that. But listening at this, there's a lot of risk. There's a lot of hidden costs that's in this. if we do a proposal at unknown infrastructure costs, how close could we come to an estimated cost?
Good question.
I think we can come fairly close because since Georgia Power has said that they could upgrade our grid area at no cost to us, we would just need to pay for the infrastructure cost to our facility. I believe we could estimate what that would be fairly close.
Curtis, may I?
Yes.
I think one thing that's going to be critical within that equation, and I've had the conversations with Georgia Power, is going to be what kind of unit are we going to be using for charging, whether it's going to be the fast units or the slow units, and where are those going to be located. In our discussions, we focused on locating the overnight plug-in, which would require an upgrade of the amount of power that we have to upgrade the service, but they can handle that. Obviously, if you start looking at moving into other locations, then you have other issues, whether or not they actually can handle the power that would be necessary should we decide to go with some of the quick charging units.
Well, that makes me think, based on the kind of short time frame we're working within, I mean, because you're not just talking about the infrastructure cost, construction cost, you're talking probably about having to get right-of-ways for those remote locations and that sort of thing, which is something you're not going to be able to answer in the next month.
Right.
It's a lot of hidden costs.
So
here.
I'm thinking right now we should probably concentrate initially on this, the longer routing where we know that we've got the facility and we don't have a huge expense involved in putting in the charging station.
Yeah, $350,000 for the fast charger is a lot of money.
Well, and even then, we don't know where we're going to put them, and we don't know if we can even put them where we want them.
If you want to put it on mall property, that raises all sorts of issues with the owners of the mall, and they have not been completely cooperative in
Right.
that.
So what is the
Location.
timeline on compiling this information?
Well, we'll do what we can to get everything to the board by the next board meeting. That's what we're
Prior
aiming
to,
for.
so we
Prior
can
to the
make-
board meetings.
There is
yes.
one location that I think we could probably be comfortable that we could do the charging, and that's the Waters Avenue Shopping Center. You know, because there was some CAD infrastructure work done there before as a change station or a mini hub or something, and I think that we could probably, and I can't speak for the city, but I think that we could probably, because that is city property, you've done some work there. If we wanted to try at least one of those, that might be a location that we could look at, because we wouldn't have to worry about costs for right of way. It would just be some arrangement with the city.
We would need to also make sure that that land doesn't get sold or anything like that too.
Next to Memorial Hospital.
Okay, do you want to say something? Okay, Grant, and then Priscilla.
Just real quick on the Lono, I did want to mention that there have been rumors, and I don't know how true this is, but the FTA will be announcing another round of Lono, maybe even as soon as by the end of this calendar year. So this could come at us out of nowhere really quickly.
More funding options.
Right.
That's
But if let's say next month they were to announce it, we would have almost no other option than to partner with a manufacturer right now because we haven't gone through the RFP process.
Priscilla.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you for a very thorough outline that you